Okay.
All right, hello, Dr. Cunningham. It's certainly great to see you today. Just for the sake of the recording, what is your name?
My name is Paul Henry Cunningham.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, March 17th, that's St. Patrick's Day, 1930. Now you can do the math.
1930. So during this time period, what exactly was going on when you were born?
What was going on where?
So
During
this time period, I'm aware that the Great Depression was happening around this time. Were you able to experience this almost firsthand?
I was young enough during the Depression that I didn't remember a lot of it. I knew that financially we were not well off, but we didn't know that. We were pretty naive to know what was the world of affairs, and we were just like ordinary kids who go out and play in the morning, come back at night, crusty, dirty, and be scrubbed up and so forth. But there was always enough food and always a good roof over our head. And I had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and a brother. And so we were just an average American family at the time. Somehow or other, my mother was able to make do. We had good, wholesome food and good clothing. And interestingly enough, during the Depression, it was like this pandemic. People didn't do things. Well, back then you didn't do things, but my father, who had served in the U.S. Army in 1918, 1919, that's after World War I had ended. He was a young man. He was in the Army. He was sent to the Philippines. And then something we don't learn much about in our history, being Korea's proximity to Siberia, but his unit was sent to Vladivostok to kind of be the peacekeeper between the Russians and the Japanese forces. Going on at the Russian Revolution, and Japan saw a chance to move into Manchuria, and we were kind of there to keep the peace. So that was my father's experience. So when he came back, he remained with the National Guard unit. That's like a peacetime reserve. And they used to do training down along the Delaware coast, Atlantic coast of Delaware. And they do firing practices and so forth. Well, here it is in the midst of the Depression, and we had vacations at the seashore. So, like I say, we weren't aware of it. It was only much later that we learned, what a struggle it was to get along during that period of the Depression.
So
from high school, I had a foggiest notion what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to go to college. That is one thing, but no one in the family had ever gone to college, and we didn't have guidance counselors to determine career aptitudes and interests and so forth. So I thought, well, I'll go in the military and buy a little time. Maybe after a couple of years, I'll know what I want to do. And so I was fortunate enough to learn about a program that the Air Force had, whereby you could select your technical school before you had to enlist. If you didn't get the school you wanted, you didn't have to enlist. And I chose the one that was of longest duration, and which was radar repairman's course. And so I entered the Air Force in the fall of 1948. And after basic training, I spent about 42 weeks at Lackland Air Force Base. That's along the Gulf Coast of Biloxi, Mississippi, and an area that keeps getting pounded by hurricanes. And so that took us into 1949 or 1950, early 50 when I graduated, and was assigned to an air base in South Carolina. It was an early warning, the 606 Aircraft Control and Warning Squadron of the 502nd Tactical Control Group. And of course, our job was to maintain air surveillance. And I was only there, I guess I arrived there along about March 1950. And of course, you know what happened on June 25th. And after our ranks were pretty much disseminated by reassigning people elsewhere, finally the whole unit got orders to go to Korea. So I arrived in Busan in it's like September 20th of 1950, and it was quite a shock. I didn't know what to expect. As you probably heard many times over, we knew nothing about Korea. It was only after we got there and the Air Force provided with little booklets to learn a little bit something about the country and the culture. So we set up our operations. As you come into Busan Harbor, I don't know if any of you come into Busan Harbor by boat, and up along to the right, there is a high hill there, and that was to be the location of our first radar installation. And so we operated there for a few months, and I was part of a unit that remained there to operate that set, and the rest of the unit went forward. As you know, our forces were pushing up into the Yalu Valley at that time, and then when the Chinese push came, they were forced back, and they came back to Busan, and we regrouped and we moved to another location about 20 miles north, operated there for a few months, and then we came back down to Busan, loaded onto 2 LSTs and a Navy freighter, and it took us around, and we committed Incheon and moved back south to Pyeongtaek. We operated there, I guess that through the summer of 1951 or into the summer. And then our unit was moved north to the old Kimpo Air Base. And there is a hill, we call it Old Smoky, that is between the air base and the Han River. And it's about maybe 10 miles west of Yeongdong-po. And I spent about 10 months there, and it's from that location, and I came back to the States. And that was a period of 17 months, a little longer than the normal tour of duty, but they had to get our replacements over there. And so that was, our mission there was to maintain air surveillance over the entire peninsula, all aircraft, incoming, outgoing, enemy, friendly, so forth, and to track missions and so forth. And we had quite a high rate of on-air time, so we performed quite well.
Right. So you said that you were in the Air Force, correct?
Yes.
So during the Korean War, then what was generally your job then as, a person working in the Air Force?
What was the mission?
Yeah, what was like the general goal, and what was your job during the Korean War in Korea?
Oh, well, my job was to keep the radar set working. And like I said, we had 42 weeks of, about 24 weeks of electronics fundamentals. And then we moved in and worked on the radar sets and the various types that we had. And we have, of course, the long range. I was in what was called ground radar, the long distance intercept. It was ground control intercept. And the other avenue was ground control approach. These are the radar sets that are at the airports to monitor the planes as they make their takeoffs and landings. But ours was ground control intercept. And then we had the ones that determined the distance that the target was. We had another antenna that was like a rocking chair. It rocked, and that gave you the altitude of the target. And then, of course, we had another set that was we call IFF. It was to identify the type of aircraft, and it would send out a signal, activate a transponder in the plane, and it would came back a friendly code. We knew it was friendly. If it didn't respond right, it was enemy. So so they were the three types of aircraft of sets that I worked on. But after after I returned and entered college, I thought, well, do I want to pursue this electronics and go into electroengineering and so forth? But I found it didn't really appeal to me as a career path, and I guess you might say I'm more of a people person, and I sought a career in a field education. What better place where you're working with a young, malleable group, and I think it was a right fit for me.
Right. So taking a question from the chat, Ms. Pereira asks, how did you tell your family and friends that you were joining the Air Force? Were there any conversations that stand out from the time, and how did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
Well, it was just we kind of scattered. Back in 1948, I went to a large city high school. There were 429 graduates in my class. So we kind of, a number of my friends did the same as I did. We went into the military to buy some time. And so we didn't have any kind of big sending off things. It was just the next phase of our life, our maturing and so forth. And it wasn't until I got back that I felt, gosh, my classmates are 4 years ahead of me now. I'm just getting started here. But we took it in course, and of course, this is referred to as the forgotten war. It was at best an inconvenient war, coming as it did right on the heels of World War II, sandwiched between the Vietnam War, and it was pretty unpopular. So there were no ticker tape parades or any big celebrations, things like that. And so it's just like you just went on about your career and or pursuing a career, preparing for a career. And then like I said, I enjoyed education. A number of my buddies were in education. I was teaching a subject that I liked to a grade level I liked, coaching a sport that I liked, which was wrestling. And I married about 2 years after I returned, and had 2 sons. And of course, it was nurturing them and trying to get them interested in things. So we just kind of like went on with life and didn't think too much about the war. But with this, I must admit, marking as we are this 70th anniversary of the start of the war, it causes one to reflect on those times. And as Eric knows, I've been president of the Korean War Veterans Association for the last 2 years, ending my term in the end of June. And so I've been involved in a number of activities. I've been was on the board of directors for 2 years before that. So I've been involved with activities at the national level. And of course, I was instrumental in forming a chapter here in my hometown. But it was, and this, of course, put me into the thick of things, and have been many ceremonies at our Korean War veterans and also at the Arlington National Cemetery. But this marking the 70th anniversary really caused you to reflect on those events. You think of the circumstances, being as I was in the Air Force and usually comfortably behind the front lines, I did not feel myself in imminent danger, but things do happen in war zones, and but you just you think of the ones who were there and whose fates turned out differently, and that too could be a function of my advanced years. But the other thing, and being involved as I have been, I've become very impressed with the youth, of the fact that the citizens of South Korea, in all they do to show their gratitude for the sacrifices that were made in their behalf back there in the early 50s. But here it is, 3 generations have passed, and I find this desire to express gratitude very strong among the youth of South Korea. And that's very gratifying. And I can tell you that those of my colleagues who are still around certainly do appreciate that. You asked about communicating home. I was not a great letter writer in that time. My mother would write regularly, but I was less diligent about writing back. And in fact, I was paid a visit by the chaplain one time. He says, "Young man, when was the last time you wrote home?" So that was kind of a wake-up call, and I tried to do a little better after that. But that came from again not feeling that I'm in imminent danger, and but again, it's your loved ones back home can't see that, can't sense this. Well, they hear what they hear in the news, what's going on in the front lines, and can't envision, although I would send some pictures and what was allowed to be sent. But
was your family generally worried about you joining the Air Force?
They were, the fact that my father had been in, it wasn't that much. My mother, I knew, as all mothers do, they worry more. And I know my mother was very worried. Not so much, I enlisted for 3 years. That was from October 1948, and I would have been out in October 1951. However, on June 26th, 1950, President Truman, with trying to marshal the support of the United Nations in coming to South Korea's aid, extended everyone's tour of duty by 1 year. So at that point, I still had like a year and a half. So I didn't think too much about tacking another year on my enlistment. So instead of doing 3 years, I did almost 4. They very kindly left me out 2 months early. That way I could matriculate in college that fall, in the fall of 1952. So,
Yeah. Could you expand more upon your education prior to the Korean War?
Well, I went to, as I said, it was a large public high school. And city of Lancaster at that time was about 55,000 people. And they had a boys' high school and they had a girls' high school. Well, in 1938, they decided they're going to build a new high school. They needed one. And the federal government, as part of its Make Work legislation after the Depression, made monies available for construction in communities. And so it opened in 1938. It merged the boys and girls high schools. And like I say, there was my class was 430, but you had the GIs, our military, returning from World War II and going back. Many of them left in high school without graduating from high school. So we had a whole wing of this huge, big H-shaped building to the veterans school. And we had that contingent, but in my class, there were like 430. And it was very modern at that time. And I think it only cost then, in 1938 about $1.5 million to build. Now the thing would probably cost about $100 million to build that. After the 50 years, we went back for our 50th class reunion, and they had just completed a $22 million renovation on the place. And but our curriculum was pretty standard. I didn't take the complete academic curriculum. I took the general program with academic subjects, and I passed up the advanced algebra, unfortunately, because getting into electronics, there's a lot of mathematics, vector algebra especially, and that presented something of a hurdle in getting through tech school, but I made it okay. And but the school boasted the largest indoor swimming pool east of Hollywood. Now, Hollywood's on the extreme west coast, and we're on the east, so that it was unusual to see a natatorium at that size in a school building back then. But
All right. So from the chat, then people are wondering, what was your perception of Korea before entering, and then how did that sort of change with your interactions with civilians?
like I said, we knew very little about Korea, and the getting to Korea, part of my shock was to see the cities, the little villages and so forth, the huts, thatched roof and so forth, and the agrarian economy, the use of night soil for fertilizing was a shock to us, and we saw in places, and I have burned indelibly in my mind one scene of a young boy. I would say he might have been 12 or 14, and just with burlap for clothing, and the weather was quite cold then, even in Busan. And I thought that this poverty, never had experienced anything quite like that. And so it is a source of pride to us today to see, what Korea has been allowed to become as a result of having the oppression lifted from them from the occupation of Japan, and certainly released, having its energies released to build Korea into the 10th strongest economy in the world today it would seem to think it was all worthwhile.
Yeah, and another question from the chat that Ms. Keller wanted to ask was, different military campaigns are often credited for providing opportunities for advancement in areas like technology or medicine. From your perspective, are there certain advancements that we could credit to this time in history in the Korean War?
Trying to think of on a positive note. There's certainly negative ones with the armaments and things like that, but again, just certainly it's just seeing that snapshot. I can't think of anything. The radar sets that we were working on were World War II vintage. And then, of course, they made many improvements. So I probably wouldn't recognize the radar today. First of all, ours was in the vacuum tube era before the solid state electronics. So that's been a major change there. And of course, that's opened up the the world for improved communications in many forms. So
Yeah, okay. And, I recall you saying that you were an enlisted man, is that correct?
that's correct.
So do you feel that there were any sort of societal influences that made you want to enlist in the Navy or in the Air Force at all?
Well, I was interested in the Air Force. I was interested in aeronautics. That's in my yearbook, graduation from high school. Like I said, I enlisted. I was 18 years old when I enlisted. To go to officer candidate school, you had to be 20 and a half years old. So I couldn't become an officer. And of course, people coming out of college, going into the military, they have 4 years, they're 22, usually at that point. So I had to wait till I was 20 and a half to go to officer candidate school. And when I was 20 and a half, I was in Korea. So, and at that point, my thoughts were turned, I wanted to go to college. I thought, if I go to college, I can come out, I'll still be less than 26 and a half, which is the maximum age you could enter pilot training in the Air Force. So I thought I come out of come out of college, I have my degree at 26 and enlist, and I could go to pilot training. But so much happens then. I met my future wife, and after dating about a year, we were married. And as I said, children came along soon after. Well, our older son was born a year after we were married, and then realized I was going to be a teacher, and teachers aren't in the highest pay categories. So I thought, I can't keep two kids in college at the same time, so we spaced our sons 4 years apart, or 3 years and 9 months. So it was close. So our sons both did extremely well. The older son wanted to fly, and he went to the Air Force Academy and graduated, but in his final trimester, he developed a back problem that didn't clear up, and he was given a duty assignment to Williams Air Force Base, where it's kind of the career path to leading to the flying for the Thunderbirds. After 5 weeks, they ordered him into a hospital and performed all sorts of tests. And we, as parents, not giving it a second thought, because he had for 4 years, the best of food, clothing, shelter, education, you name it. And they performed a laminectomy, and that ruined his chances of ever being eligible to fly due to the ejection seat training that they must go through periodically, and they didn't want to do any permanent damage to his spine. So instead, he became a lawyer for the Air Force and spent almost 21 years, and left the Air Force to go to the Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney. So, and he's still working at that today. And they have 2 children, a boy and a girl. And the younger son spent his whole career in investment banking, and served with corporations like Goldman Sachs, formed his own investment company, managed a hedge fund for a while, and concluded his career by being vice president for global investments for the Canadian Pension Plan Advisory Board. And at age 60, he's retired and doing quite well. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. So we're quite proud of what they've been able to do with their lives and their as well as their kids.
So this is another question from Mrs. Keller, but what do you hope are the most important lessons learned from the Korean War for Korean society, as well as for the international community?
Would you repeat that, please, Eric? I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah.
Let me boost this up another notch here.
So what do you hope are the most important lessons learned from the Korean War for Korean society, as well as for the international community?
I think with the presence of a hostile and kind of alien government and culture to your north presents what we think is the greatest single threat and concern. I know we are as hopeful as you are for some reunification, and along with that, the denuclearization of the peninsula. We were quite delighted when the initial meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, we thought that might lead to something, but again, our hopes were dashed in that. But one other thing, I've been very fortunate. A little over a year ago, my wife and I moved into a retirement community, and in newly built apartments, very, very nice location, central and everything. And one of the other residents here happened to be a Korean American couple, and we've become very good friends. They saw my vehicle with my national president, KWVA, and so forth, and we of course became acquainted and we chatted. And I told them that our chapter, which has 100 members, about 50 to 55 show up at a meeting, and we happen to meet in this complex where I'm currently residing. And I said to David, I said, would you like to come to one of our meetings? He said, yes, I would. So both David and his wife, Esther, came to our meeting. He said, could I say a few words, please? And I said, by all means. So David expressed very eloquently his gratitude for the services that were rendered back in the 50s. And about 3 weeks later, our treasurer received a check for $3,000 to be donated to the Wall of Remembrance that will be built at the Korean War Memorial. A year before, our chapter had completed a fundraiser for that, and we raised $36,000 through putting on a concert involving both classical music and Korean performers. And we were assisted very nicely by the Korean American community here in central Pennsylvania, as far as engaging the artists and so forth. And luck would have it, we had snow on that day, so it hurt our attendance, but it was well received. And like I say, it resulted in raising $36,000 from that. And that was attended by the military attaché from the embassy in Washington, D.C. and his wife, as well as the assistant military attaché. And they were very impressed with the program. So we have been very successful in raising money for that. So David's contribution went along with that. And David's story was, I guess, like so many others. His father was a physician, and when we lost Sol the second time, he saw his father, and as he and his sisters and mother were heading to a relative's in Busan, and he never saw his father again. And so it's very hard for him. But and of course, this helps us understand why the desire to try to have a reunification. So.
So whether that be through the Korean War Veterans Association or just on your own, were you able to keep in touch with any of your, like I'd say, comrades during the Korean War?
Not initially. Come back, you're busy with your family, your career, and so forth. And it was quite a while before I attended any of the reunions of our squadron. And but I did attend the first one, I guess, when I retired in 1994. I had moved then to North Carolina, which was going to be my retirement home. I got into sailing, and I did quite a bit of sailing, and I wanted to go and be in an area where I could sail year round. And North Carolina is just such a place. So in the fall of 1994, I did attend our first reunion of our squadron, and then I attended one just a couple years ago, and so as you can well imagine, the ranks are dwindling quite rapidly. I didn't go to the last one; it was held in Branson, Missouri, and I for somehow or other don't like tourist traps like that.
Okay.
And I did remain in close contact with my best buddy, who was from North Carolina, and where I was in Lancaster and made my career here. My parents used to go south in the wintertime at Christmas time. I had a brother then, a pilot in the Air Force, and he was in South Carolina. And I have a older sister in Florida. So as my parents would go down there for the holidays, they would always stop by Franklinton, North Carolina, and visit with my buddy's parents. So we kind of kept in touch with each other through our parents. And they had visited in Lancaster one time early in my career. But now we just keep in touch with, in 2016, we were both scheduled to make a return trip to Korea on the your Department of Military and Veterans Affairs Return to Korea program. And about 6 weeks before we were scheduled to go, we received word that our trip was canceled. Never a satisfactory explanation as to why. We have suspicions, but at any rate, that was 2016. During my 2 years as president of the KWVA, I had no less than 4 invitations to return to Korea, none of which I could make because of conflicts in the schedule. So I was hoping that maybe I would be back this fall, but again, that was the St. Eden Presbyterian Church. They have a return to Korea program, and but they too had to cancel their plans. So maybe one of these years I'll get back there.
I think an issue that a lot of people wonder about, usually pertaining to veterans, is PTSD. And so what we wanted to ask is, what kind of support exists from the Korean Veterans Association or Korean War Veterans Association that tries to support veterans with these sort of mental issues?
Well, we're of course supported mainly from your membership dues and fundraisers that we hold. We are chartered by Congress. We have a congressional charter as a nonprofit corporation. And of course, that imposes certain restrictions on some of the things we may do. I will say we have, in recent years, we have enjoyed tremendous support from the public, which wasn't always true. It's only been in the last perhaps 5 or 6 years that there has been a greater outpouring of support for veterans of all wars. Of course, the most gratifying thing is the support that the citizens of the Republic of Korea show to us in all that you do. As Eric knows, they donated 40,000, the Korean Veterans Association donated 40,000 masks, and they made a huge donation of about $500,000 to this wall of remembrance that's being built. They just gave another $10,000 to it, plus these 40,000 masks. And so they are very, very supportive. The St. Eden Church is very supportive in what they do. And of course, your Ministry for Patriots and Veterans Affairs made 500,000 masks available to us for distribution. Well, the KWVA only has a staff of 2 people in its headquarters offices, and we don't have the infrastructure or the financial ability to distribute these to all of the chapters. So we asked the Veterans Administration if they would undertake this task, which they readily consented to do. We provided them with the mailing lists of all of our chapters, the 176 chapters of the Korean War veterans that we have around the country here, and they developed a formula based on their membership and to these chapters for their distribution to Korean veterans. The chapter which I belong to in my hometown here received 10,000 masks. So we had the logistical task of having them distributed mainly to veterans' homes, retirement communities, to our veterans who are hospitalized or in constant care facilities. So that was on their part. And of course, I was overwhelmed when the Korean Veterans Association, on concluding my term of office, along with the gifts that I mentioned to you, they presented me with the Grand Meritorious Award, which I have here. It's a, I guess I will hold it back here. So that's quite, I was really impressed with their recognizing so it's a gotta get a drink of water here.
I guess that provides a segue into the next question of what in today's society, what kind of challenges do you think still exist for a lot of veterans in society, and how can we improve that? How can we improve to make sure that a lot of veterans get the care that they need?
How can we improve what for veterans?
So how can we what kind of challenges exist for veterans still today, and how can we reform the system to make that better?
Um, our military has been, or I should say, Congress is very generous in making education available to veterans. I was privileged to have most of my college tuition paid for by the government, which was most appreciated. And of course, that has continued in some form or another to this present day. So a young person who wants to get a college education, they're willing to sacrifice 4 years of military, they can build up credits and get their college education. The challenges that they face, I think, and I don't know, that you hear a lot of the post-traumatic stress syndrome, which besets so many. And until I became directly involved as president of the National Association, I really didn't understand how widespread this malady is among our veterans. But unlike the time when I came out, it was not complicated by so many other forces. We didn't have drugs to contend with the way they have right now. And that is something that that is, I'm certainly thankful. I grew up in an area that I didn't have that. It was just in raising my kids, it was hard enough to keep them from being in areas where they could be led to something like that. Fortunately, they weren't, but I just saw it. And again, I remained in education. I retired in '94, but by then the ravages of drugs was pretty prevalent. And but you hear of homelessness among veterans, and of course I don't know of any homeless veterans right now. There was a time when there were quite a few, but they have been pretty well taken care of. And I think the services are there for the veterans if they will seek them. And I've watched just in the last 4 years a change in the Veterans Administration in their attention to the needs of the veterans. As a veteran, I don't have the services I would have if I were a disabled veteran. And you're talking about, okay, well, you can go to the VA for your medical. No, they do have means tests. And fortunately, I'm not eligible because I failed the means test, which is not a bad thing. But but the services are there for anyone who needs them. They just need to seek them. And
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for giving your time, and thank you everyone who stayed until the end to listen. We will be doing another session on Friday for another guest speaker, but thank you, Dr. Cunningham, and we will see
Okay,
you.
well, thank you. It was nice being with you. And I'll be thinking of you guys tomorrow when I'm out of Memorial in Washington. So, and keep up your good work. So,
Good luck with the memorial, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much,
okay,
Dr. Cunningham.
thank you all.